Thank you, Kirsten, for the kind introduction. Yes, Kirsten and I have been working together in the Coalition for International Criminal Court for a while. And as part of the effort, we were together in New York last year. End of the last year, we were working together in the Assembly of State Parties of the International Criminal Court. While we were together working to support a universal and effective international criminal court, there's a bunch of experts working with International Criminal Court from a different angle. There is a commission on inquiries of the human rights situation in North Korea. Around the same time, we were in New York. This commission of inquiring on the human rights situations in North Korea, funded by the Human Rights Council in Geneva, have presented their report to the world. They have found that the human rights situation in North Korea was so heinous, mass violation of human rights has been committed, and there is a crime against humanity, and this should be referred to the International Criminal Court for further investigation and maybe prosecution. These two does not necessarily relate until last week when I was invited to join a seminar, a global seminar on the next step action for the after the Commission of Inquiry's report released and call for a prosecution at the International Criminal Court. This Commission of Inquiry, the chair is Michael Kirby. I know him before because he was the special rapporteur of human rights situation in Cambodia, in the country I have been working in the past 3 years. He's also a supporter of the LGBT communities around the world. And also, he has produced this phenomenous report on the situation in North Korea, my country's neighbor, and a country I have visited. That is him. As soon as I've heard he's going to chair this seminar, I pretty much said, I have to go. I have to go, I have to meet this judge, which I respect a lot, in person. I have to get to know him. This seminar happened in Salzburg, Austria. Has any of you visited Salzburg before? Good, one. I'm showing you a picture of Salzburg. It's a really lovely place. A lot of our discussions was happening next to this lake. At the back, that's the Alps in the center of Europe. For me, that was particularly important because that's the place where they filmed The Sound of Music. The movie I grew up with. I went to a foreign language school, and this is the movie we learned English from. One of, and we played characters in this movie. Anyway, so I went to Salzburg, and I joined this global seminar. Because it was a very high-level global seminar, it invited experts from cross-discipline. There are lawyers, diplomats, also experts in international relations, academias, NGO, civil society, NGO representatives. It was quite high level, and to induce a very heated debate without jeopardizing anyone's reputation or work in the future, it was under the famous Chatham House rule. Can you show the next slide? That's most of our discussion was taking place in this Schloss, like a castle, under Chatham House rule. Because it was under Chatham House rule, everyone's names was anonymous. I cannot share with who was the participant. But the moment I get the participant list, I was left speechless. Why? In this 40-person participant list, I think half of them are ambassadors or ex-ambassadors or ambassadors-to-be, or someone at the equivalent level, like a special advisor for Mr. Ban Ki-moon or something. And another half has been working in the organizations that work with the human rights situation in North Korea, either relief or other things, for a while. I was frankly shocked, and immediately that question comes into my mind. Why am I even invited? As a small lawyer who not many people know me except the people in this room, why am I even invited? I think later I found out the answer was, I'm probably the only international criminal lawyer they can find, they can think of, and he's from China. The charm and the strength of inclusion speaks for itself. No justice without inclusion, as we're discussing today. This example speaks for itself. Even we have this example, I still need to ask this question. What is the point of this inclusion? I'm not working for the government, as Kirsten has introduced. I'm a private citizen. I work in the civil society. I have an NGO, have an office next door to here. But I don't work for the government. Even I am crazy enough to work in the government or work in the authorities. It's not like I can make any change on the decision making. The decision making will be some 30 levels above me. What is this point of inclusion? Why they're inviting me? And by inviting me, did they commit a mistake? I have this doubt. I have this question in my mind all through this 1 week in this beautiful place. When we were having this heated discussion, a lot of the discussion was on China's role in the human rights situation in North Korea, why China is not standing up, why China is not maybe blocking the referral, or will be blocking the referral of the human rights situation of North Korea for a prosecution at the International Criminal Court. At some point, I had the encouragement or serenity. I just don't care anymore. I'd stand up and make an intervention. I told them, probably most of the people in China would think the human rights situation in North Korea is owning a disguised excuse for the West to destabilize North Korea for geopolitical reasons. That was the truth I get from most of the people I talk with in China. I think a lot of the people in China is thinking that way. For me, that was very easy, just to explain something I have gathered, easy peasy. But I get a very good encouragement from other fellow participants. One of them has been working on this situation for so long. She told me that was very inspiring for her, because she would thought the human rights situation in North Korea, it's so notorious, it's so bad, and never think about from other perspectives why people would think it from a security perspective or geopolitical perspective if the situation itself is notorious. There I found my role in this process. I finally found the peace. They did not commit any mistakes. By inviting me, I made a contribution. Now I have explained to you the example of inclusion. I have explained to you how I found this inclusion have been fruitful in the discussion. But not necessarily everyone agree with me on this. My motto in the organization is, any international justice without Chinese participation would not be a true global effort. Because I've been traveling around the world, because I've been working with the different international tribunals, international organizations, that is the true belief I have. But not necessarily everyone would think in the same way. In the West, there are more people, or not more people, there are some people believe that with more Chinese participation, that will dilute their effort on human rights and global justice. It's better to work with like-minded groups like European Unions, American, maybe Japanese and Koreans. That's in it. Ultimately, for them, the dragon is there to conquer, and they don't want that. Across the world in China, there is the same dilemma I have. A lot of the people in China would think, why we need to join some initiative started by the West, driven by the West. Why shouldn't we have something like Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank in every sector of international relations and piss off the Americans and the Japanese 100 times more? That's the dilemma I always have. That's the question I always have when I'm trying to argue there should be more Chinese participation in both ways. Either Chinese coming to here, at the student here today, or bringing more international engagement back to China. I don't necessarily have an answer to that, but as a Chinese, we are all entrenched by our history. We have a history of 5,000 years. So from this history, I get something to share with those people who is afraid of Chinese rise and who think China will conquer and who is threatened by China. 600 years ago, yes, I was in Ming Dynasty. There was a Chinaman a few years older than me only, but he traveled to Africa. His name was Zheng He. He's a great admirer. He went to Africa and found this little animal from Africa. It's actually a giraffe. In this picture, you can see a Chinese holding a giraffe and with all the Chinese characters on the above. It was a giraffe he took from Africa. When the first Chinese arrived in Africa, instead of taking back the colonies and slaves, the Chinese took back a giraffe because that looks like the fortune animal chilling in Chinese culture. The point I'm trying to make here is when China embraced the world, it is nothing for them to be fear. And above all, it brings back fortune for the Chinese themselves. Well, I'm a little bit, hesitant now. If Chinese have conquered the world, maybe we're speaking Chinese in this room rather than English or Spanish. Anyway, if China embraced the world and brings back the fortune for the Chinese themselves, what about the rest of the world? Does it bring something good, some good fortune to the rest of the world? What will be the fortune China brings to the rest of the world? On my way to Salzburg, I passed Vienna, the capital of Austria. And this is one of the signs I have visited there in the Mozart Square. Where in Vienna, everyone plays music, either Mozart or Beethoven. This is the statue in the Mozart Square of Vienna, which documents a very touching story of another Chinese who were in Vienna in 1930s. After the Nazi Germany annexed Vienna, life becomes difficult for that 200,000 Jews living in Austria. Their life is difficult for them, and they cannot get out of it, not if they get a visa to travel to a foreign country. Unfortunately, at that time, it was impossible for them to get a visa to travel to the Western Europe or to America, to the New World. Why? Because in 1938, the civilized state have met in France in Avignon, decided that they will not accept Jewish immigrants. At that time, this very brave general consulate from China decided to give visa for the Jews to travel to Shanghai. Shanghai was occupied by Japanese a few years afterwards. That visa means nothing. You don't need a visa to go to a Japanese occupation area, which is a friend of a German ally. It was only a visa for the Jews to get out of the country to a new world. It is not a visa to go to China. It is a visa for survival. We don't know how many people did Dr. He, or Dr. Ho, as here says, save in those years. He started to work in 1938, and he finished his work in 1940s. But we do know in the first 3 months he started to work, 1,500 Jews were saved. We do know that during the war, there were some 30,000 Jewish people arrived in Shanghai from all over the world and have a very vibrant community in Shanghai. And we do know in the year where Dr. He was functioning most effectively, China has accepted more Jews than any other country in the world. So that story speaks for itself. It's not to prove who is better, who is worse. It is one simple message, that humanity is one. In the time of confusion or in turmoil, we'll help each other to get through the difficulties. I will leave my intervention with this sentence. It's the preamble, the first sentence of the Ram Statute, which a lot of the students will argue in front of the International Criminal Court, I heard, in this week, even though the preamble is not as useful as the article, but the preamble is definitely more beautiful than the rest of the articles. It says all people are united by common bonds, their cultures pieced together in a shared heritage, and concerned that this dedicated mosaic may be shattered at any time. With that, I conclude my intervention and give the floor back to the audience. Thank you all.